So this is kind of the start of our trauma-informed care initiatives that we are going to be doing. So this is an overview presentation created by the United Way and the work group associated with that Cattell is a part of. So she'll go through that, kind of give you some sort of sense as far as some of the things related to this work. And of course, we'll have some other follow-ups later on in terms of ACE training and some other initiatives. And in also addressing some of the issues around safety and some of the other areas that we're beginning to work on here.
What's your first principle?
Safety.
Oh, all right. Sounds good. Yeah, that's a good question.
So I will turn it over to Mandy. And yeah, who's got her check?
Hey, I'm gonna go sit by that person.
All right.
I have to sort of chuckle. This is the worst. I'm actually on vacation this week, so I'm calling this vacation.
This is your vacation?
Yeah, I'm on vacation, so.
Oh,
yeah.
we need to.
Give me a little grace.
We
No,
need to like figure that out.
we do need I might need to come see you. Yeah. Yeah. No. And honestly, it's totally cool because I'm excited to get this out to you guys. We are rolling out our trauma-informed care efforts in the community as part of this. I think we're on our third year of this project. I think driving here, I'm like, how long have we been doing this? About 3 years. So United Way is a convening agency. I work for UW Extension in Winnebago County, so my role is Human Development Family Relationship Educator, which is a broad net. I think that's on purpose so that we can do everything. But one of my main focus of work is really rolling this out into the community around what are we doing as individual agencies, actually really as individual people, how do we become trauma informed, and then how do we contribute to the wellness of our agency, and then our agencies will be contributing to the wellness of the community. So it's really exciting. How many of you guys have heard of trauma informed? How many of you guys could define it? Yeah, right. Yeah, raise your hand. No, don't ask me to define it. We can't even. We've wrestled with definition of trauma informed for probably the whole 3 years. So there's lots of different ways we talk about this, but really what trauma-informed care comes down to is becoming more responsive and receptive, and also having a really good understanding of what trauma does to a brain in childhood, which affects your adulthood. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but then you're going to do some follow-up education around the ACE study and what that means, and adversity in childhood and how it works in your brain. So this PowerPoint that we created, can everybody see it? I feel like I'm in the middle. Okay. And I'm trying not to move, and I'm a mover, so I'm gonna stay right here. This PowerPoint that we created as an education team with United Way is really meant for everyone. So we're looking at some of the other ways that you, at every level and every side of an organization, are going to contribute to becoming trauma informed. The good news is that we don't have an end point of trauma-informed care, which is also the bad news, because there's some wrestling around when are we done. You're never done. It's a continuous improvement process. So every 6 months or every year, we're recommending that you get continuous training and continue to have conversations. So at UW Extension, we actually have trauma as part of our weekly staff meeting. We do have trauma this week. We have trauma-informed care as part of our weekly staff meeting. And so we talk about some of the situations and some of the principles that we're working on implementing. And actually that came as part of one of the principles that we at Extension are implementing, which we're doing organizational culture. One of the things we identified using the tool was that we weren't talking enough about what this means. So we developed a strategy. So today, in the next 55 minutes, we're going to talk about how the ACE study relates to trauma-informed care. So we're going to give you, I'm going to level set everyone in a really 40,000 foot high level of what that is, what that study is, and also what it is not. We're going to define, I'm going to give you our definition of trauma-informed care, which we wrestled with for a long time. We're going to talk about the benefits. What are the benefits internally and externally? So one of the things we're finding is that as agencies work through this process, they're starting to retain employees longer, and employees are happier and they feel better. And some of that is from the principle that if you're able to provide superior customer service and you feel really good about what you're doing, you tend to be happier at work. And who agrees with that? It makes a lot of good sense. But a lot of times, how many of you have ever been in a position where you weren't able to provide or meet a customer's needs? Because of policy, procedure, your hand's like, hey. Yeah. Are you noting this? He's like, I'm leaving. I'm not taking notes. So yeah, absolutely. We've all been in a conundrum where you were like, gosh, this is crazy. I can't do the right thing because of some policy, or I'm sending this letter. Scott and I just had a conversation about your no-show letter and how that language is one that he's working on shifting, because it's sort of like kind of mean, right? Like, you know, you're not here whatever twice, you can't come anymore. And it was literally a template letter from another organization. Never reviewed, never looked at. So when we talk about trauma informed, it's really allowing us to do our best for the people we serve. And so I think that that's exciting. It's exciting for me not to have to ask somebody if they're male or female. So we went through this huge organizational trouble. Honestly, it was a challenge when we said our demographic forms are not trauma informed. So it's simple changes that make me life so much better. So how did we handle gender? I have to report gender to the federal government or I don't get a job. So we wrestled with this and we had check boxes, and then we wrote, one of our iterations of it was, and forgive us for being naive, but we did male, female, other, and we're like, other, like that doesn't feel good. So then we did male, female, non-reported. That didn't feel good. And we didn't use these, but we're like, oh, that doesn't right. So finally, you know what we did? We just have an empty box. Just fill it in. You know, but it took us a long time to sort of wrestle with that. And you're going to wrestle with some of this stuff. And I'm excited for you guys at Catalpa because you have a willing and interested agency in doing some of this. It doesn't mean that every suggestion you have is going to be like, yeah, let's do it. Because there are policy, but there also are ways that we can continue to help everyone feel better about their work. Our clientele does better. We thrive. We meet our outcomes. It's win-win everywhere. And then I'm gonna finish up today with just telling you about what our 5 principles are, what we landed on. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about the history and why we picked our 5. So we're good? This is backwards to me, so. Okay, all right. So how many of you guys had any sort of anything on ACE, the ACE study, ACEs, early childhood? Okay, adversity, you're like, maybe I did. I'm gonna give you a quick refresher today. And we will send this out to you, but has anybody seen this TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris? Yeah, it's good, right? Yeah, it gives you a great summary of what we're talking about and why we're doing this. We also ask, after this, one of the next chips, Scott and I kind of talk about, like, we're chipping away at educating Catalpa because you guys aren't centralized. So you guys are chip 1. And so, yay, right? So we're going to talk about, like, what else we're going to do training in. So there's some pre-training and some post-training, and I'll probably send the slide deck out to you guys as a PDF so you don't have to take notes if you don't want to. So when we look at what the adverse childhood experiences are, what the definition is things that happen in childhood before the age of 18 that impact your brain growth and development. Typically negative, so adverse childhood experiences. So we look at a whole range of them, from child abuse and neglect to we look at other things like violence in the home, a parent who is struggling with an addiction issue or an untreated mental health issue, and I'll tell you the 10 in a minute. We've expanded this definition to also include toxic stress, and here's why. In the original ACE survey, we recognize that not every adversity is included. There's only 10. Think of all the things that can happen in your childhood that can cause you profound brain changes. And we'll talk a little bit about the structural change. Your brain actually shrinks if you are a child who was built in a toxic stress environment without any intervention. And so we've expanded this, and it's pretty acceptable to talk about toxic stress. So toxic stress is stress. How many of you guys are stressed? That's not necessarily toxic stress. What the definition from Harvard University of toxic stress is stress that is unmitigated, which means you don't have a supportive person to help take on that stress. So a child can have a very stressful childhood, but if they have a resilient, buffering adult, they can survive and thrive in that childhood. So how many of you guys have ever had an experience of extreme stress and somebody stepped in and said, help me carry that for you? That's positive stress. That's life stress that shows up at your door that you can't control for, but you have buffering factors. So what we want to do is really, we can't change a lot of life circumstances of the kids that we work with or the adults that have grown in that, but we can also empower parents to learn about buffering their child from some toxic stress. And that's a first strategy. So we look at the 3 different levels of stress. You know, there's good stress. There's good stress that you're like, yep, that's good. Who's the last minute sort of procrastinator? Yeah, you're like, yeah, I am. So you like that good stress. It's like, if it wasn't for the last minute, I would get nothing done, right? And then we look at, sometimes it's me. Then we look at like the next tolerable stress. So you lose a job, you have to move, you're getting married, you're having a baby, your kids are going to college, it's college time. Anybody send a kid to college this week? Nobody in this room. I've taught a whole bunch of classes a week. Every week I have a crying mom. Oh, I sent my kid to college, and I'm like, oh my gosh, come sit by me. You know, so yeah, it's just that I didn't figure for what is happening in the community with sending kids to college. Anybody send a kid to preschool? Kindergarten, first grade? Yeah, rough. First time you get them on the bus, you know, so I had a mom and a dad yesterday in a class doing that. So we look at that tolerable stress, you know, but that tolerable stress is typically like short-lived. We can manage it, we do some self-care, and we get through it. And then we move to the toxic stress, which is unrelenting, nobody's buffering it, and you're in over your head. And that's the stress that we look at as really negative, even for adults and for children. So, here's our definition of trauma-informed care. So trauma-informed care and practice, because we couldn't decide if it was care or practice, is a strength-based framework grounded in the understanding and responsiveness to the impact of trauma that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety for both providers and survivors. So this is unique. We actually are really pushing the boundaries a little bit by saying you cannot be trauma-informed if you're not trauma-informed for the people we work with, each other. So it's not a outward-facing effort. It's internal and external. And we're excited about that because we're pushing ourselves to say we can be as amazing and have art and kindness and happiness, but if we aren't taking care of each other, we aren't going to be good at this. So we really push that. And that creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. So safety is critical for people who have been built in toxic stress. And we'll talk a little bit about that right now. So let's go over what the ACE study means. These are the 10 original ACEs that were studied. And I'll give you just a tiny snapshot of history in that. In the 1980s, there was an obesity clinic in California run by Dr. Vince Folletti. So he had this clinic. It was run by Kaiser Permanente, which is a major insurance provider. Great benefits, huge clinic, lots of participants who were doing really well clinically. And I'm talking they wrapped these folks in comprehensive care. Psychological care, physical care, all kinds of things. What they found out, what he discovered as he was reviewing data, was that many of his clients who were biometrically successful, so they had reduced their body weight, were dropping out of the study, dropping out of the program, and then a year or two later they were coming back and they had gained all their weight back, which is a pretty typical pattern with weight loss. And so he was like, this makes no sense. They're successful, why wouldn't they stay in this comprehensive wellness model? Or why do they quit when they're successful and then fail, come back, and then we have to start all over again? He just didn't understand it. So he decided to research those participants, which were numerous participants who were leaving the study. And he developed a screening tool, as researchers do, and he started asking them about their childhood, their experiences, their lifestyle, all kinds of things. And during that study, what he did was he asked a woman who was one of these participants, he asked her how old she was, or he asked her how much she weighed during her first sexual experience. And he meant to ask her how old, but you know, he's a weight loss researcher, and so he just misspoke. And he she said, she thought about it and she said, I weighed 40 pounds. And he's like, no, I meant to ask you how old you were. And she said, no, I was probably 8 and it was with my uncle. And he recognized that was a trigger for him, that he had heard that story over and over and over again. So he started to say, oh my gosh, there might be something to this. So he did a comprehensive study of 17,000 of his participants who had left or were in the study. And what he found is that the people who were successful clinically but left or came back or weren't doing as well as he had hoped had some commonalities with their childhood. And so he started to draw patterns around that. Many instances of abuse or neglect or alcohol and drug use in their home, all the domains of abuse. And then we have divorce, we have violence, we have the incarcerated of an adult, so the loss of the caring adult. And so he took this information, he wrote it up, and he took it across the country. Nobody believed him. They were like, you're just worried about your study, your health insurance, your program's failing. People are obese because it's their own fault. And he's like, I don't believe that. I think there's something wrong. So he ended up at a CDC research conference, and Dr. Anda was there at the conference, and he watched the data, and he's a principal researcher with the CDC, which is, you want those guys on board. And he was fascinated by what he was seeing, because the data indicated that of Dr. Folletti's population, 2/3 had something happen to them of these 10 things in their childhood. And if 2/3 of a population has anything happen, it's an epidemic. So if 2/3 of us had Ebola, it's an epidemic. If 2/3 of us have the flu, it comes on the news. Think about that. And so he set out to develop an incredibly comprehensive research tool, and they expanded the study. And so long story short, what has happened in the country and also in Wisconsin is we've discovered 3 things about ACEs. One, they're common. They're common. So when we look at this data, which is a little bit dated, this is from 2010 for the Child Abuse Neglect Prevention Board, we see that in our area, for example, Winnebago County, more than 20% of people have had 4 or more of those events happen in their childhood. 4 or more. Now the new data says 25%. All the numbers went up in the new study. It just hasn't been released in a decent graphic. So we look at they're common. It's common for this to happen. It's also incredibly important for us to understand that this is not just about certain segments of the population. This is us. This is widespread data. The highest density of people who have had 4 or more doing screenings was the American Psychiatric Association, professionals. So we often go into this work because we want to make a change from our own circumstances. So when we make the case for internal care and external care, it's based on the knowledge that if I ran this data on your organization, it would show up like this with your colleagues and your coworkers. So how do you feel about that? What are you thinking? Is it believable? Yeah, it's believable. Absolutely. So we know that we have to care for our internal and our external folks. So we look at, they're common, they're interrelated. What I mean by interrelated is that if you have had 1 ACE, you probably you have more chance of having 2. If you've had 2, you have more chance of having 3 or 4. Why does that make sense? Why does the interrelatedness make sense? Imagine if you had an adult who was caring for you that was struggling with addiction. What's more likely to happen to you? Neglect or exposure to potential for abuse, right? Unsafe situations, household dysfunction, violence, things like that. So if you have a household who's struggling with domestic violence situations, what's more likely to happen to you? Abuse, right? So it makes sense they're interrelated. We also know that there's a dose response. The higher your ACE score is, the more likely you are to be at risk for negative mental, physical, social outcomes. Here's where I like to take a pause, because sometimes we're like, oh my gosh, I've never heard this, I don't understand it. What I want you to understand is regardless of your ACE score or somebody else's ACE score, we need to look at this really pragmatically. we need to understand that if you're screened for anything, it just means you have more risk if you screen positive. This is a screener, it's not a predictor, it's not a roadmap. So when we screen for this and we see a higher score, what that means is that you might need a few more protective factors in your life than somebody who screens lower than you. It does not mean that you are on the road to doom and gloom and horrible outcomes and all the other stuff that we see. So if you screen positive for the BRCA gene, which is the breast cancer gene, it predicts that you have a higher likely of having breast cancer. What do you do? What happens? What do you do? Treatment, what?
More preventive care.
More preventive care. So if you screen high on this, we just want to make sure you have more preventive care. We want to make sure that you have more self-care strategies and you're connected to people who can support you. It's not a roadmap to doom. And that's what happened when this screening first came out. People saw it, they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die 20 years earlier and I have all these negative outcomes. Nope. It just means we need to put some extra protective factors around you or your family or your children. It doesn't mean that you're automatically doomed. So, questions about this? Anybody's like, oh, this is big, yeah. So we look at the attributable risk, and I like this slide because I think it tees it up in a little bit of a different way. So what this oil slick means is that of all the cases that in this original study, this is original study data, but it's been replicated over and over again. Of all the cases of alcohol and heavy drinking, 21.3% of those people have an ACE score of 4 or more. So when we look at mental health, medical treatment, or pharmacology therapy, that's a big word, 42.7% of people who have sought out these things have an ACE score of 4 or more. What I think is really profound is this one, life dissatisfaction and anxiety. Why would it make sense that somebody that has an ACE score of 4 or more, when we reflect back on that, would have higher levels of anxiety? Why does that make sense? Think about a childhood that, we're talking adults here, remember, it's not kids. We're talking adults who've reflected on their childhood and they have had things happen in their childhood of the 10. Why would that produce anxiety? Anybody ever kept a secret? Yeah, there's a lot of shame around what happens to us in our childhood. We need to change that conversation because who's at fault for that? Is the child at fault? Never, ever, zero. But they hold the shame for that, and that increases anxiety because when you aren't living authentically and you're trying to hide a bunch of stuff and you're worried about people finding things out, I promise you there's anxiety in this room right now because it's like, oh my gosh. So when we look at the anxiety, I think, oh my gosh, that's a call to action. If nothing else convinces you, it should be, we need to start talking about this, that childhood changes your brain and it impacts your adulthood. That is not something that should terrify us. For a lot of us, what it could mean is like, oh, well, that makes sense why I never balance my checkbook, or I'm risk averse, or I won't confront somebody that's not being kind. Like, oh, yeah, makes a lot of sense. Like when we can sort of say, yeah, my childhood impacted me. Whose childhood impacted them? Raise your hand. For good and for bad. We learn things from the people who grew us. We learn negative behaviors and positive behaviors, and some of us have had our brains changed in ways that you can just manage, right? So when we say, I don't have great prefrontal cortex skills, which is what happens to kids who were born and live in adversity, what does the prefrontal cortex do? A little brain science for you. Anybody know? You won't be wrong. The prefrontal cortex is everything you need to do to be an adult. Planning, emotional regulation, reasoning, thinking ahead, managing my, thoughts and all that kind of stuff. That is the last part of your brain to develop. And when you live in toxic stress that's unmitigated by a caring, compassionate adult, you don't develop that skill. So think about all the policies and stuff and the things that we do that people that just don't have great planning skills suffer because of. So when we look at these are undeveloped skills versus bad behavior or challenging behavior, we are more compassionate. When we send a child to kindergarten and they don't know their colors, what do we do? Of course, there's no judgment. We just teach them. When we have an adult that doesn't know how to keep a calendar or pay a bill on time, what do we do? Yeah, we don't say, hey, can I help you? We send them another bill. Yeah, right. So we don't provide them the skills and tools, and we don't teach them. We don't take a minute to say, how can I help you do this? When we recognize that these are unlearned skills, we become more compassionate people. We recognize, and we don't need to prove that they lived in trauma. We can just simply say, maybe they don't have that skill. Maybe they just don't know how to regulate their emotion when they call and yell at me for the weather, or things like that. So we look at this, and it's really I think it's a call to action to sort of think about, oh my gosh, I never really thought about how childhood impacts people for the positive and the negative. And I think we sort of all knew that in some ways, but now the science has definitely backed it up. So this is I think it's the last piece on ACEs. So if nothing else has sold you on today, let this. This is an MRI and a CAT scan of a 3-year-old brain. Okay, so the kid on the left, thriving, healthy, Red 2 responsive environment. The child on the right is a child that lives in extreme neglect. It's proof, right? Finally, what is different in this brain? This brain versus this brain?
Small.
Structurally sized, smaller. What else?
Connections are.
Yeah, so these are just dead spots with no blood flow. So we look at, was I fed responsibly? Was I hugged? Was I kissed? Was I loved? So we look at structurally, there's just an inarguable difference between these two children. And that does not just magically change without intervention as an adult. And then we look at this MRI, and here's your prefrontal cortex, right? So kid who has a thriving environment versus kid who doesn't. What's missing there? Everything. It's not even working, not even turned on. So when we look at, this is the science, and about 4, maybe 3.5 years ago, I don't remember, I was at an ACE primer. I had never heard of it. I had no idea what it was. It was a Thursday night. I'll never forget. It was a Thursday night, 6 o'clock. I was hungry. I was annoyed. I was like, why am I at another training? And this slide rolled on the screen in the middle of a very long slide deck. And I was sitting in the back of the room, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's real. It's not just another thing. How many of you guys have heard a lot of things? Right? You're like, I'm tired of things, I'm tired of efforts, I'm tired of community, collaborations that don't really change things, and we're weary of collaboration in the Fox cities. Believe me. We are weary. Because we've seen so many things like start up and then back off and start up and back up. And this slide literally changed my entire career. Because I was not in this work. I was not doing this, and I was like, oh my gosh, if people only knew that the science is now absolutely backing up what we've known for so long. How many of you guys have worked with people who, no matter your best efforts, are not responsive? Absolutely. When we shift that thinking to, maybe it's not a choice. Maybe it's not a choice. Maybe they're just struggling in ways that we don't know, and they don't have the brain that we would expect from childhood. They just don't. So the question I always get asked is, can this be fixed? Yeah, it can. With targeted intervention at many levels, we can learn skills. But just like it's easier to learn skills in childhood around foreign language and music and playing. Anybody ever tried to learn how to play an instrument as an adult? Yeah. Anybody successful? Because good for you. No. I'm trying to learn a lot of new skills, and I'm like, maybe the windows are shut. They're not. It's just a lot harder. It's a lot harder to learn things as an adult. So this is also the case for early intervention. We want to stop those ACEs from happening, but also we are great in this community at treating children. We love children. We can get community will behind kids, and we build parks, and we build trails, and we have all this stuff. Who's noticed the parks lately? The libraries, what are they? What? Are they thriving full? No, they're empty. if we don't care for the adults who are raising these children, we will never fix this problem. Never. So when we can be incredibly compassionate for kids, we do not lay that same compassionate response over the people who are growing them. And so until we have a dual approach with that same level of compassion and understanding and respect and kindness for the adults, we're not going to fix this. Because their brains are changed too. It doesn't just revert back once you get to adult. So when we think about this, we have to think about it in a comprehensive manner. So the good news, there's good news. There's a lot of good news. There's a lot of hope in this. So the good news is that those brains that I showed you are actually doing their job. So your brain's job is to keep you safe and alive, always. Primary goal of your brain is to keep you safe and alive. Which is why when infants are born, what do they cry for? Food, diaper change, and some comfort, right? Brain is keeping them alive. So as we grow, our brain becomes more complex. If our needs are met, our brain is going to say, hey, I've got to take care of myself. I've got to keep myself safe. So I'm going to scan the environment, and I'm going to be hyper aware, and I'm going to be vigilant, and I'm going to be impulsive because I've got to act quick to keep myself safe. So imagine those kids that are living in those really unpredictable, stressful environments. Those brains are doing their job. They're doing their job. They're doing a beautiful job of keeping that child safe and alive. It shouldn't have to do that, but it is. And so our brains adapt and grow into the environment that they're built in. They're doing an excellent job doing that. So when we look at the different skills, so individual characteristics and traits might serve them well in that toxic environment, but once they are into the real world, is every environment toxic? Does the library need this personality? Your brain doesn't know that. So your brain doesn't have the sorting mechanism inherent in it to just take a deep breath and relax. We have to develop that skill to scan an environment appropriately and adjust our regulation. So I feel safe in here, so I'm not paying much attention. But I am also very aware of where the exits and the doors are. It was just how I was built. I don't know why. It just is who I am. We are who we are. I never assign seating to people. Never, never, never. Why? Why wouldn't I assign seating?
Because it can cause stress and anxiety for people.
Yeah. Does anybody like to sit by a door? Anybody like to sit by a door? Yeah, so you're sitting by the door. Does anybody like to not be boxed into a spot? Yeah. If I was sitting in your spot back there, I would be sweaty. Because I'm like, I don't want to, you have to crawl over the table. It's just who I am. So I assume, as adults, you guys are going to sit wherever you want that makes you comfortable, right? If you were sitting in a spot, if I made you go sit in that back corner right there, would you be like, what would you be paying attention to? Me or the environment?
Probably more the environment.
Yeah. Yeah, so when we think about just shifts in our approach, that's trauma-informed care. I never assign seats. Because I figure you guys should sit where you feel good. Because otherwise you're not going to pay attention to me. So when we look at it, it's not these big things. It's small shifts. So our brains are doing exactly what they're supposed to be. I'll send you this video. So why should we become trauma-informed? Does anybody have questions with the ACE stuff? It's a lot. It's a lot. That's a whole training. So we had a little bit of a how are we going to do your ACE training? We really hope, and our goal is that you do ACE training first, but sometimes that just doesn't work. So it's all right. We're resilient. So why do we do trauma-informed care? So we look at, I love this analogy. So if a house is on fire, what are the symptoms of a fire for people? Smoke, what else?
Alarm.
Heat, alarms. So if we brought in fans and said, oh my gosh, you're hot because the house is on fire, we're fixing sort of the symptoms, but we're not putting the fire out, right? So when you lay this on top of being trauma-informed, if we just look at the symptoms of chronic tardiness, explosive tempers, things like that, and we say, oh yeah, you have to not do that, or you have to abide by this policy. And I'm not saying we don't abide by policies, but we have to look at long, bigger term. But if we never say to somebody, hey, I've noticed that you've been late for every single appointment. How can I help you be successful? Were your parents always late? How did your childhood make that happen? What is your view on time? We never sort of had that compassion, like, hey, how can I help you be on time? What can I do for you? So symptom is late, that's not about what's going on. Sometimes we just never even ask people why they're late. And you know what? Has anybody ever asked an appointment person why they're late? You know what we've heard in doctor's offices? Take a wild guess. Why are you always late to your appointments?
Because the doctor's late.
The doctor's always late. So they're like, I'm going to come here and I'm going to sit in a waiting room that causes me distress for 20 to 45 minutes. Why would I come on time? Yeah, isn't that crazy? Like, oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. So yeah, if you start asking like, why are you late? You might not want to know the answer, but it's a good one, right? It's a good call to action, isn't it? Like, keep your appointments on time, because how can we ask our clientele to do something we're not willing to do? You know, so just looking at it that way, addressing the root cause. This is addressing the root cause. It's making sure that we're looking at safety. So here's what trauma-informed care is. Universal precaution. I don't need to know anybody's ACE score to be trauma-informed, because the rising tide of compassionate care benefits everyone. So it lifts all the boats. So if I'm kind and compassionate and I meet your eyes when I'm speaking to you and I use your name and I answer the phone with a smile, you know, there's that customer service. I've never heard how that works. I haven't tried it. Has anybody been told to do that? Does it work? Yeah. Well, you know, but I think I've heard it's true. When you shift your behavior, some people aren't going to need it, but they'll benefit. Some people desperately need it, and they will benefit. So the rising tide will lift all boats. It's good customer service. I started this by saying it feels good to do good, and that is entirely true. Better relationships between you, your supervisors, each other, and the people we work with. So we use the word individuals to talk about clientele or customers or whatever. We said individuals because we spent a long time figuring that word out. We have better outcomes, and it's just the best practice. It's the new gold standard of customer services that we utilize this approach of understanding that toxic stress in childhood changes us in adulthood. Bottom line. It's irrefutable. You can go back and look at science after science after science, or you can just say, yep, I believe it. Either approach is great. A lot of people are like, gosh, I really want to learn more about this, and we can help you do that. So here's our principles of trauma-informed care. We looked at lots of frameworks. There's many. There's community commons, there's the CAA model, there's all kinds. And what we did as an organizational group, there's probably 12 different agencies in here, is we looked at them all and we said, what works for our community? And this is what we landed on. So when we talk about safety, we mean physical, emotional safety. So do you feel safe coming into the parking lot? Is it well lit? How's the doors? Is there good signage? Things like that. We also talk about emotional safety. Do I have privacy? Do I have control? Do I have all kinds of things? So we look at trust and transparency. So are we not keeping secrets from the people we work with? You know, are we open, honest, and transparent? Do we trust our supervisors? Do we trust each other? Empowerment and collaboration. This is giving people their own control for as much as it is appropriate and safe. You know, do we work together to solve problems? Do we feel empowered to speak up and make suggestions? That's that internal piece. Externally with our clientele, do we empower them to sit where they want? Do we empower them to be in the waiting room in their own space privately? Do we have all those things that we can do to empower them? Organizational culture is one of those, like, how do we feel about how we work? Like, what is our culture? What do we believe in? Do we all know our vision and mission and values? Do we speak that? Do we know what we're doing? Do we know what each other is doing? Do we believe in the policies out? Do we have good evaluation? Things like that. And then we have screening and assessment, which is really all that stuff we collect from people. So we have this conversation as part of screening and assessment. I don't do assessments as my work. My office doesn't do that. But we said, well, we don't screen. And my administrative assistant is like, we don't have to do screening. We don't screen. I'm like, you do screen. You're collecting demographic data. That's a screen. So how do we ask for that information? Do we tell people why? Why do I need to know if you're male or female? because the federal government told me I have to. Like, literally, that's it. Like, I have no choice. So we look at all of these principles. So here's our common language around this. We decided the principles, so we use the principles for the 5 things we're going to assess. Elements is like pieces of the principle. And when those of you who are on this team are going to get really good at this language, we talk about activities and components. So when I show you the screen, those are things we need to do. So there's a screening tool for each of the principles that we go through and we do a checklist. Yes, no, does this need to be done? Can we afford to do it? All that kind of stuff. And then here's the language around individuals. So this word individuals includes everybody. We're all individuals. All right, so here's what safety might look like. Safety drills. What if a tornado came? Do you know where to go? Good. One person nodded. Follow you. What happens if somebody comes into this room right now and threatens us? Do we know what to do? I don't know. I'm gonna follow one of you because I'm hoping. Follow him. So we have good signage in and around the building. So I can give you a really good example. I forgot to tell Scott. I'll tell him. I was told to come in 444. Guess what door I went in? Yep. And she's like, "Hi. Do you need an appointment?" I'm like, "Oh God, I love you. I'm not even close to being under 18, but thanks." No, I'm good. Incredibly friendly. She goes, "I think you're in the wrong. You have to go to the next door." But she could not get up to take me there. I walked out of the building and around because a client was right behind me. So she felt terrible. Like she was in conflict about this. She's like, you don't have a badge. I'm like, nope, I don't want to walk through your offices because that would be weird. I'm like, I'm totally good. But do you see where that like sort of came up? And she was in conflict about it. She did not feel good about it. I know right off the bat. She was like, they're doing trauma-informed care and I'm sending the lady down the road. Yeah, so we look at that. And so do we have good signage? All you would have to do is tell me come in door 2. I'd have been like, sounds good. So safety drills, we have plans in place for emergencies and everyone knows them. So if you're new here, how do you find out about safety protocol?
Orientation.
Yeah, how much stuff do you learn in orientation? Anybody read their employee manual yet? Yeah, good for you. I look at the things that apply to me, like when can I use my sick time, vacation time, when am I gonna lose it? All of your interactions are welcoming, respectful, and compassionate. That means between you, among you, to the individual, we think about being welcoming. So what are some attributes of being a welcoming person?
Saying hello.
A smile, what else?
Saying
Eye
hello.
contact, even saying hello. How many of you guys walk by people and never say hi? Yeah, like some of us just do that because we're in our zone. So stopping and saying hello or just greeting somebody by name. I do this work in the library systems and they've changed a couple policies, which I'm really excited about. So they ask people, like in the first interaction, they say, hello, how would you like me to address you? This is just the checkout person. And they've had these amazing outcomes. They're like, people are nice to us. I'm like, no kidding, because what's your favorite word in the human language? Your own name. People love, their brain lights up when they hear their name. So looking at interactions, receiving services of clear understanding, all individuals receiving services have a clear understanding of what they're getting, what they're signing. The HIPAA forms, who's read one? Well, you guys probably have. I've never, and I sign them all the time. I have no idea what I'm signing. It's sort of explained to me most times, and it's well, and they're like, oh, here's your HIPAA sign, and I was like, I should read that. But then I'm standing there at an appointment. And your staff feels respected and supported. So this is internal and external. We are pushing organizational leaders to prioritize this because when you feel supported and respected, you're going to do better work. So it's a little self-serving, and that's kind of how we're selling it. Number 2, why wouldn't you want happy staff? Principle 2, trust and transparency. So what does this look like? We have open and respectful communication. We talk a lot about predictability. So if you have a supervisor who sends you an email that says, hey, can you come see me Monday? And it's Friday. Lots of us are like, oh, shoot. What'd I do this week? Well, how could that supervisor change that practice? Easy peasy.
Tell you Monday.
Yeah, don't tell me on the weekend, first of all. Or do what?
Say what
I'd
it's
like to
like.
see hours.
Give details.
Yeah. Yeah, like, can we talk, because oftentimes, how many of you have ever assumed you're in trouble and you walk in and they're like, hey, wanted to know if you like the paint color. I worried all weekend that something I have said, which is a true statement in my world, that has now gotten me in trouble. Truth, and I'm glad it's on video. So it's a risk for me to be on video. So talking about the consistency and predictability. So what are you saying to each other? Do you send each other comprehensive bullet point emails that say, hey, can we talk about this? Do you address concerns, or do you tell everybody else about the concerns? Who has we have water cooler networks here. Do you go to the person, and can you go to the person? So we talk about this, like, you should address people. There are people who are not safe to address. So are you open to having crucial conversations? So we look at all of these things, like, we need predictability. I know that if my boss emails me, and she does this, on a Thursday and said, let's meet next week, she would never send it to me if it was something I'm in trouble for. She's gonna come to my office and tell me. But I know that, it's predictability. So now I don't worry about it anymore, and I'm a worrier. We have a compassionate and informed philosophy, so we assume that people are doing the best that they can do, which is so hard, and we support each other in that. We believe that about our coworkers, we believe that about the individuals we serve. Role clarity and boundary. How many of you guys have a PD that you understand and do everything and don't do anything extra? Right, no, nobody. So you know what your role is, you know what your boundaries are, you know what your position description is, and if it changes and grows, which is what typically happens, we go back and we revisit that in a really predictable, safe environment. Like, gosh, I'm supposed to be working 20 hours a week and I've been doing 30. And I know that that's appreciated, but we gotta figure this out. Like, I'm willing to do it, or I'm not, so we can have those conversations. Empowerment and collaboration, what does this look like? So we honor the individual, we respect the fact that they are who they are. We don't try, who's ever tried to change anybody? How successful were you? Yeah, 0. It's hard enough to change ourselves. We are not gonna change other people. So we need to empower them to make their own changes, to live their own best life. And sometimes their own best life is something we would never choose. Right? We got to get straight with that people do their own best. It builds hope. I think one of the best things, and I wish this was like in the front, is that when we understand this brain science, we can be hopeful and saying, yeah, like, we just need to teach you a bunch of skills. We need to support you in your learning and your growth. We need to help you do that. We need to be compassionate and understanding, like, it's not your fault, it's just the way it is, and we can work to correct that. Use lived experience to promote recovery. So recognizing that folks who have had trauma in their lives, if they're willing to disclose and share that, you need to put them on your teams. Because they can speak in ways that people that haven't don't know. So when we look at, like, building safety, have somebody that says, listen, I need safety in my environment, it's important to me, let me be on your team. And our administrative teams are working really hard to make sure we open the door for everyone. Creates trust and resilience, enhances relationships, and requires shared accountability. So we talk about what's shared accountability. I know my role, you know your role, we're going to both work hard in it, but once one of us is sort of overstepping and working harder than the other one, we're not helping. We're continuing that cycle of rescue and not really empowering people. So principle 4, organizational culture. So this is the one that we talk about making sure that all staff understand ACEs. All staff understand adversity, because we can't just tell people to be compassionate with no reason. Some people are naturally more compassionate than others. It's a continuum. But now that you sort of know why, it sort of feels like, oh yeah, I should probably really think about this. So we understand that, the commitment to ongoing education, ongoing continuous improvement. So this is not a one and done, this is going to be part of your future. Doing your best for the individual, and be willing to make connections. So sometimes you can't do what they need, right? Our organizations need to get okay with the fact that we cannot be everything to everyone, and we need to be better at saying, I can't meet your needs, however, I know that Cindy at this organization can. So we need to get better at community referral, and also a warm handoff. So not just, oh, you don't have any money, go to Levin, right? Go to 11. Well, I don't know where 11 is. Well, it's over in Menasha. A better, more trauma-informed approach is you might need some financial assistance. Have you tried Levin? They're located at 1429 Midway Road. You park in the front, here's a map, and go in, and the person who's going to take your information's name is Lucy. Look at the difference. What is the likelihood that person will go in scenario A, go to Levin? What about B? Way more, right? Because they know where to go. Because we assume people know all kinds of things. We just make assumptions that people know everything. So you could say to them, do you know where it is? Oh yeah, I know where it is. Okay, sounds good. But otherwise, if you don't, here's a map, right? Here's a map. You know, so we look at being a continuous process. We're not going to get a sticker, which really distresses some people in our group. They're like, we want people to know we're trauma informed. And what I say is they'll know when they walk in your door right away. They're going to know if you're compassionate or not. So what does this look like? What does screening and assessment look like? I talked about this. We talk about what are we collecting? Why are we collecting it? How many of you guys collect data? How many of you know exactly why you're collecting every question? You should know that, because if somebody says to you, why do you need to know that? You should be able to say, I need to know your income level because that helps me put you with the right provider. I don't know the answer to that, I'm making things up. But you should be able, I don't know. I need to know your spouse's name because if you have two insurances, we can bill appropriately. You know, so answering those questions of why you're asking that, you should know. And you are encouraged to challenge those people who are making these policies to say, I need to know why I'm asking these questions, because that's trauma informed. You need to be able to be prepared to respond compassionately to that. And this is somewhat of a therapeutic bullet, but not always. So we talk about, like, if somebody comes to me and says, I don't really want to tell you my race because I'm an undocumented person, and I say, don't fill it out. I said, I just need to turn in whatever you fill out, but it doesn't have to be complete to count. And they just don't fill it out. So to me, I know why I have to do it. I'm compassionate, and I say, you're safe here, because I know I can tell them that, because they're safe when they're with me in a public entity. So, but I had to learn that, because when all of that stuff happened with undocumented folks, we had to get like on the ground and learn what the rules were. Because I had to be able to say to my clientele, my individuals who work with me, that if you're in a church, they can't come get you. Like I had to figure it out. So we have to take some ownership on how can we be responsive and collaborative in this. So we look at developmentally appropriate, cultural, competent, and gender neutral language. So that's what we wrestled with, right? Like we're trying to figure that out. And then a plan is in place. So if you're screening for distress, and somebody calls you with a distress or something that's way out of bounds for your regular expected call, do you know exactly the plan? Do you know the plan? You have to know the plan, right? This is something that you can say, well, Scott, is Scott your boss? Mm-hmm. Okay, you can say to Scott. He's going to love me by the end. You can say to Scott, he knows, and you can say, Scott, I don't know what to do if somebody calls me and says their child is suicidal. I don't know what to do if somebody calls me and says they can't wait for their appointment that's, 4 days from now. I don't know what to do if I get an angry person who threatens me. So if you don't know all of these scenarios, we're level setting your organization right now. There's no shame in asking. And I'll go back to Scott and say, I told your staff that this is safe time. This is safe time. So how many of you guys are wrestling as a person with something that you feel like you should know and you don't? Yeah, now's the time to ask. Here's your, I felt like I should know. When we change our organizational culture, we start to be okay with people forgetting and okay with people not knowing what we expected they know. And so that's that culture shift of it's always okay to ask a question. Even if you've been here for 20 years and you should know every single thing, your brain only has so much capacity. So knowing that is really important. Questions about the screening or any of the principles? Good. Okay, we're rounding to the end. So here's our vision for the Fox Cities. Everyone in our community is treated with compassion and respect, which allows them to thrive without adversity. So how many of you guys know about post-traumatic stress syndrome? Yeah. How many of you guys know about post-traumatic growth syndrome? Yeah, so there's great new research saying that when you go through adversity with support, oftentimes you can come out better in some categories. You can live. We're not saying we just want people to survive in adversity. We're setting the bar higher. We're wanting them to be instilled with hope and compassion and know that their best life might be through the adversity. We can't often change the circumstances of what is happening with people, but we can support them enough to say, you will live a thriving life. And this community has enough resources to support people in that. We just have to get them plugged in and connected. So that's our vision. This is a great example. We did this. When we talk about, oh my gosh, what is trauma-informed care? I don't understand. You know, what do I have to do? What do I have to be? So think about organizations that you go in and you just love being there. Who has an organization that they go to and they're like, oh my gosh, they're amazing. They have great customer service. I'll tell you mine, because we were all challenged to put one up. I love Forest View Dental. I don't work there. I don't get any kickback. I don't love the dentist at all. But who's ever been in their building? Rock on, do you love them? Yeah, I just put you on the spot and I'm sorry for that. But they've got coffee and fish tanks and comfy seats and kind people and lamps that you can hide from people sitting behind. They have up-to-date magazines that represent all people that walk in. So one of the questions we say to people of other ethnic diversity is we say, when you go into an organization, do the magazines look like you? No. Does the art look like you? Does that feel trauma-informed? No. Small changes, right? So make sure that your magazines represent your population. They do, because I looked. You know, you go in and they don't say, I did, because I just love them. They also do things like not shaming me, for example, if I want a heated blanket. So when you go in, they say, hi, you know, Mandy. They know my name. I've only been there twice. There's a little laminated card that says, which of these would you like today? They don't say to me, do you need a blanket? Which implies, oh, she's afraid of the dentist. They just say, which of these do you want today? Which one? So they make them all okay. I've never done it, but I might, because those heated blankets are awesome. So they just have this like sort of universal approach. Maybe everybody wants sunglasses. Maybe everybody wants earbuds. What kind of music do you want to listen to? They give me total control. It's amazing. Give them my name. No, don't give them my name. Don't give them my name. You can't. But what I'm saying is that you can. No. We talk about like Festival Foods has a 10 tile theory, right? 10 tiles. If you are 10 tiles away from them, they are required to say hello to you.
Wow.
Customer service, right? Go test them. Go test them. Don't call them out on it, then Festival's gonna hate me. But we look at like when we just named a few. We just named a few that we were like, oh my gosh, what is trauma informed? What does this mean? It means that I walk into an organization and I'm well cared for and they don't treat me like I'm wrong or they just give everybody the same compassionate approach, so it doesn't call out my dental anxiety. It just says, sometimes people have dental anxiety, you know, right? And we're gonna help you if you do. But they don't need to know. They don't know my trauma background, they don't know my ACE score, they don't care. They just implemented sort of a universal screen or a universal approach. Okay, so rounding us up, because we're about a minute late. So here's what I say. You can't go wrong by encouraging others to be more and offering them hope and possibility. So you just can't go wrong by giving people hope that this will get better and I am here to help you. And I know you're frustrated. Sometimes just validating that if you have an angry person on the phone. And often sometimes we just say to them, I want to be able to help you. And that just, because then we're not against them, like I want to. I really want to help you. So giving them some hope and some possibility. So we didn't leave a lot of time on purpose for questions because we knew we only had an hour and you guys are off to do other things. But does anybody have any quick thoughts or questions? It's a lot for an hour. I recognize that. We will for sure be back. We'll continue this conversation, but I encourage you right away. I always like people to leave with things that they can do right away, not just this idea. If there's something about your job you don't know, find out within the next week, okay? Be brave, ask questions, find it out, ask your colleagues, and everybody sort of have this like agreement of like, I'm gonna answer whatever question anybody asks me and I'm not gonna roll my eyes. You know, so safety things. So you guys are starting with safety, which means now's the time to be safe in asking questions and to speak to where you're lined up. And I'll give you a quick example and then I'll cut you loose. we have an office. Has anybody ever been to my office? Yeah. So we have an office that we walk in, you walk down a hall, and there's a big open window, and our 3 administrative assistants sit there. And the staff all comes from behind them. So they're working away, and we walk up behind them. And so we did this, and you know, we would just be in their space and being like, hey! And I recognized, like, oh my gosh, one of our administrative assistants jumps every time. And so I was like, you know, guys, maybe we should talk about like where you want to face. Or if you can't change your configuration, you can tell me, quit walking up behind me. You know, come around the front of my desk. And one of our administrative assistants was like, oh, I really don't care, it doesn't bother me. One of them was like, please everybody, walk around the front of my desk, you're scaring me like 1,000 times a day. And we're like, oh, and we're like, why didn't you say this? She's like, because I didn't want to bother you. I was like, oh, okay, well, now we changed our practice, right? So we look at simple things, like, is your space safe? Do you feel safe where you park? Do you feel safe in asking questions? Are you getting the Friday email bombs that I call them? If you have an office or space, or are called into somebody's office, are you in control of the doors open or shut? These are all like little things that we can do that's gonna make us feel more safe, and then we're gonna be able to instill safety in others. So you guys are starting there, but you're gonna go through all the principles. I know they're gonna gather a team of people. If this feels really compelling to you, raise your hand and get on that team, because you're gonna make some really great organizational changes here. And Catalpa's ready. We've done readiness, we've done talking. They're ready and they're excited. So I think you guys have a really great opportunity to make some good changes for yourself, for your colleagues, and for the people we serve. All right, questions? Good. Thank you for coming. I don't know where you're going after this, so wherever you go, have a good Friday.